Welcome to This Week in Heresy, episode 39, Hospitality, Gender, and Inclusion, with our in-studio guest, Dee Shull. Hey Dee, welcome to This Week in Heresy.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So for people who don't know who you are, can you introduce yourself and tell a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Okay, so my name is Dee. I am a long-time sort of eclectic pagan who's been solitary for a really long time, but come into community probably in the past 4 or 5 years. I primarily work with Celtic and Norse deities. I also do a lot of oracular work and sort of getting more and more involved in the gender diverse pagan community as well, because it's I identify as gender fluid, so it makes sense for me, at least, to get involved with that community and be trying to make better space for them and more welcoming spaces.
Well, more welcoming spaces is definitely it makes a huge difference, but being very explicit about that welcoming space is really important. And I know you talk a lot about hospitality because of the deities that you work with. So
part of the hospitality thing comes from, I was moderating an online activist conference, and Elena Rose brought up the concept of hospitality as compared with inclusivity. And the way she put it, and the way I understand it, is that hospitality is not just our doors are open to you. It is you are welcome here, and we will make sure that not only are you welcome here, but that anybody who treats you poorly is not. And so for me, that changed my dynamic around inclusivity to one of hospitality. So this past Pantheacon, I was facilitating 2 separate discussions for gender diverse pagans about what hospitality might look like, how we could bring it around. And we had a really wide range of people participating in both discussions, including someone who identifies themselves as a separatist, somebody who identifies as metagender, which is essentially, since you've interviewed Lupus, I presume E has explained what metagender is.
I don't exactly remember if E did. But
as E defined it to me, metagender is not male and not female. It is its own gender, which in some circles might be known as third gender. I know that E has occasionally teased himself about it in third, fourth, 87th gender.
Yeah, I remember that.
Along those lines. So my experience of pagan practice has been exclusively in the San Francisco Bay Area, which tends to be a very liberal environment and a very accepting one. So I have been with a few groups where they have welcomed me with open arms, and I have been absolutely included in participating in rituals with them. And at the same time, it is almost as though they're not entirely sure what to do with me. And, well, this piece over here fits. Honestly, most of my practice has not been strictly Gardnerian. I participate primarily at this point in more heathen practice, predominantly with a group called the Vonic Conspiracy, and that has a very long and fascinating reason for the name, which I won't get into here. So the Vanir as deities seem to be more accepting of my fluidity, and yet the majority of the people in that group are cisgendered, i.e., the gender they were assigned at birth matches how they perceive themselves. It's one thing to be part of a very accepting group, especially when that group doesn't have anything that is necessarily strictly gender-tied rituals, except the group does have a midsummer ritual where the priestess who runs it requests for that ritual only if people could identify themselves as male or female, but she doesn't tell you how to identify. She just says, however you identify. And the main reason for that is because we're wrapping ribbons around a maypole, and that's more a practicality type thing.
Yeah.
But like I said, I have not been involved with any Gardnerian groups, and while I am sure that there are some liberal Gardnerian groups out there, there is also a strong flavor of gender binary for some pagans out there.
Right.
And I'm not saying that, and I'm really not saying that all groups should be open to gender diverse pagans. What I am saying is that if you think your group might have room for it, let's talk about ways to make it happen.
Yeah, and it seems like, I mean, I talked to Jennifer and Gavin Bone a few weeks back, and it seems like a lot of the older traditions, especially over in Europe. I mean, the U.S. is, well, the U.S. But it seems like the idea of gendered polarity and having to do gendered magic is really kind of going by the wayside in most places.
Okay.
I mean, there are a few. I mean, I come from the East Coast, so I know that there's some of those covens out there. So it's not, but they're starting to become few and far between.
Which is actually really good to hear. And the way I've been talking about it with other people, I'm involved in what I believe is a private group on Facebook that talks about inclusive Wicca. And the discussion came up of how do you deal with a ritual where gender polarity is a thing? And the discussion pretty quickly came around to the concept not of polarity of opposites, but resonance of energy between two or more people involved in the ritual. And that raising energy does not necessarily require opposite ends of a pole. It just requires two people who are willing and able to resonate with each other such that it still raises energy. And from a ritual point of view, that makes perfect sense to me and fits in very well with, so when you're in ritual, how do you accommodate gender variant people? And let's say, for example, your group has an agender individual, somebody who does not have gender. And no matter how their body is identified in the rest of the world, their sense of self says, I do not have gender. They are excluded from clearly gendered rituals, but when you're talking about creating a dynamic or resonance between people, sure, they can totally participate because maybe they are strongly aligned with the concept of crafting something. And the resonance there could be with somebody who is aligned with how things break down. So you have a building things up, breaking things down dynamic, which would work completely well and doesn't rely on gender whatsoever. And at the same time, that's just ritual space. There's also social spaces. What do you do before ritual? What do you do after ritual? When you're hanging out with the people and you're having food, because, food, how do you behave towards your gender diverse members? And that too is part of hospitality. There are cultures all around the world, including here in the United States, which take offering food as that critical component which cements hospitality. It's like, if I have offered you food, you are not just a guest in my home, but I treat you with respect and make you at home. And I think in the 7 p.m. discussion, someone mentioned bread and salt as a ritual for that. Lupus, because of Ayer's scholarship with Irish mythology, also said that part of the hospitality ritual that the Irish used to engage in was They would bring you in, they would feed you, they would give you a place by the fire, they would make sure you had something to drink, and only then would they ask your name and ask what you were doing there. And so hospitality can take a lot of different forms, and it's not just what you do in ritual, but it's sort of what you do in everything.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds a lot like, well, there's some aspects of radical inclusion that include radical hospitality.
Ooh.
And yeah, I know, it's awesome. So I don't remember who mentioned that, but it came up at some point. And the idea is that, you know, part of your inclusion has to also include the hospitality and of welcome. Because if you are insincere in your welcome, people are going to know.
Absolutely. Very definitely. And that, I think, is really also a critical piece. Is a lot of people will say, we have open doors. And I was at last year's Pantheacon at the Pagans and Privilege panel. And Elena Rose brought up a really fascinating point, which was that if you look around and your group does not have a specific identity of marginalized people, that is not an accident. And what I understood her to mean from that was that we learn from our society how to do things. And we have learned that maybe opening the door is sufficient, but that it doesn't necessarily have to be sincere. So what you're talking about that depth and that sincerity, that radical inclusion and radical hospitality is absolutely the kind of thing that I want to promote.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, there are going to be groups for whom that just doesn't work.
There's kind of levels there because, you know, basically what I've told people is like, you know, you got to be clear about what's on the tin. Yes. And what's in the tin.
Absolutely.
So, you know, we are very explicit about that. And I think it's important for groups to be very explicit, like, okay, this is what this group is about.
Absolutely. And in cases like that, if the group is, we comprise survivors of some form of abuse, and we need to have a space that is, for us, where we do not have to be triggered by evidence of abuse in whatever fashion, that's fine. And I would say, you know, more power to you. My concern is, are you simply creating a feedback loop where you are not doing any work to help people with that, or even get them to a place where they can go, all right, this is my safer space and I can be here? Mm-hmm. Because like a lot of people, I think, I want to do the work. I want to get better. I want the people around me to be better. And if I can help them be better and they're willing to help themselves and let me help them, that's awesome. But if they don't want my help, I'm not going to force them. And if there are groups out there that are, we need to just be by ourselves, then more power to them. But I need to not be around you because my focus is on growth, making myself a better person, and facilitating that sort of thing for the people around me who are willing for that. Yeah. So again, honesty on the tin really, really speaks to me of the sort of thing of, if your group is not going to be accepting of gender diverse pagans, then please say so outright so we can go, all right, we will not intrude on your space and we'll go find another space. Mm-hmm. And then whatever they need to do to make themselves safer, as long as they are not then lashing out at other people. Yeah. That's, again, hospitality. When you are being hospitable, you are not ranting and raving and beating your guests with a stick. You are making the space open to them. And if your hospitality needs to be a closed off hospitality for a specific group of people, again, just let us know so we don't intrude on your space and thereby don't become uncomfortable when we realize that we're not in a space that's okay with us.
Right. Well, and that was kind of the problem that we ran into when we were doing our gender work a couple of years ago. You know, the women's groups said they were open for all women, and they weren't clear about their discriminatory practice.
Yeah.
And the thing is that, you know, there's hospitality and, you know, and being clear.
Yes.
But if you're doing that and then being a jerk about it, you're going to have to take the consequences of your actions.
Absolutely.
And I think that's just kind of the way life is. You know, if you're if you're being a jerk, then you gotta
absolutely
be ready for the feedback.
One of the things, and this is a First Amendment reference, but one of the things I hear a lot is that, you know, the right to free speech does not mean that you are also free from the consequences. And I am getting my master's in communication, so the whole free speech thing is actually a bit of a, no, really legally there are standards for free speech. And so that happens a lot with journalism and other forms of speech that are protected, and then other forms of speech that are not so protected. But what it boils down to is that whole, you know, there are consequences. And I do not want to be the person who receives the consequences of your behavior, especially if your behavior is intended to be harmful or exclusionary toward people like me. I would really rather us be able to say, I will wave at you from across the convention.
Right.
And we will go our separate ways.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's basically, you know, kind of how I've functioned. You know, I kind of go by the women's room and I'm just like, yeah, hi, whatever, you know. Yeah. But I'm also not big into gender secluded space either. It's not my thing. I don't particularly care for it. And, you know, I prefer to have a mixed space.
And I think that that is extremely valuable personally, because all right, there I'm slipping into a binary here, don't mind me.
It's okay.
There is the energetic stuff that happens when you add people who are different in, and it creates different dynamics and it creates different flow, and the energy can actually become much more powerful when you're adding a wider range of people into it.
Yeah.
But from a strictly personal side of things, if I am exposed to people who are not like me, that is likely to widen my world. That is likely to give me the opportunity to open my mind and go, hey, I didn't think about fill in the blank, whatever that is. And therefore start thinking about it. And therefore my world gets wider and I am more likely to go, oh, I've met somebody before. This is familiar to me. Welcome here. Come on in, have some food. Have you had some water? Have you hydrated recently? That sort of thing. Because if I am open to new experiences, then I am open to the new people bringing those experiences as well. So I am in full support of radical hospitality. I love that as a term. I really do.
I do too. Well, the other thing too is it can be very healing, and going into a space where you're, even if you're not quite sure, but they do really practice that radical hospitality, radical inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
You can face someone who's scary to you and be able to have a conversation and maybe get some healing done. That's happened to Sarah when we went to church the first few times. So it can be really powerful.
I would absolutely agree. And I will bring up a point wherein I haven't seen it recently in the news, but there have been Republican lawmakers who have opposed, for example, same-sex marriage until they are exposed to people who are same-sex attracted, like family members. And because they are exposed to people, because they're getting that input, they're able to heal their point of view and say, wait, okay, I think I have been wrong about this. Mm-hmm. There's someone very dear to me in my life who feels this way, who is this way, and therefore that person is able to open their heart a little wider, and that kind of healing is also kind of critical. So having radical hospitality-based spaces is essential, because now I will admit I like teaching. I do teach public speaking on a local university campus. So I'm all for the teaching. Not every gender diverse person is up for it, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But you don't have to be taught in order to be able to learn. And again, opening your eyes and seeing a wider world can really definitely be healing and really definitely lead you to go, oh, that makes so much more sense. I understand better now.
Mm-hmm. Well, when I was talking to Lupus, we had talked about how, it really takes listening to people's stories to really kind of understand the rest of the world, really. And I've seen this in so many different circles and so many, like during the gender work that we did,
yes,
at church, you can see it happen. There was one particular woman who was pretty horrible to my wife, who was a Dianic.
Oh.
And then the next year, because they were present when we had our discussion, and they got to listen to these stories of some of the, particularly of some of the other trans women who had horrific things done to them, and they were very honest. And the next year, she was very radically on the other side.
That's amazing. And
I've seen that happen so many times just because they've listened to people's stories and got to put a face to the idea.
Absolutely. And that in a lot of ways is, for me, very, very solidly a reason to encourage that kind of radical hospitality, especially for gender diverse pagans, because if you see us, if we are visible to you and you hear our stories and you understand where we're coming from, it is very likely you will have a little more or a lot more empathy. And I am a huge believer in empathy. I am a huge believer in saying, I see it now from your point of view. I see what your life has been like. Mm-hmm. And that cycles back for me again to understanding other people, and the hospitality feeds into the understanding, which feeds back into the hospitality, and just keeps that circle growing and growing.
Yeah, and it's amazing to watch that happen. And at the workshop that we did at Pantheacon, I was amazed because, the first discussion we had was very angry. The second one we had, the ritualized one we did, was very intense because it was kind of putting some cleaning agent in the wound, right?
Yes.
And then this one, and it's been a few years now since we've done our thing. This one was just so much more open, talking about the differences of gender and the different types of gender and the spectrum of gender.
Yes.
And I was really fascinated how much that has opened up. And I think I'm seeing and this year I've seen the start. It's the same thing. They're starting with the angry conversation this year, and I'm looking forward to seeing how the pagans of color also move into that open discussion.
Oh, absolutely. And with all of the events that have happened over the past several months, the hashtag Black Lives Matter, these are discussions that need to take place, but in a lot of ways, because they touch very, very tender areas, there's going to be a lot of hurt, and there's going to be a lot of anger, and that's why you clean out the wound, because you can't heal if you've still got stuff in there.
Absolutely.
And so I'm sitting here going, yes, I am talking to people who understand that my ultimate goal is not to hive off and go be our own little group, and we'll ignore the heck out of you and you'll ignore the heck out of us. But if you see us, if we become visible to you, and if you see us for who we are and not who you think we are, then our wounds around being unseen and unheard begin to dissipate, and your wounds around whatever it is, whether it's fear of difference or
ignorance
or whatever that is, those also get the opportunity to get cleaned out so we can work on the healing together.
Right.
It cannot be just the work of one person. I am sitting here now, and yet there are a lot of other people out there who are absolutely like you, doing we must have these spaces where we have the safety to talk about tender issues, difficult issues. And then, maybe one year, all we're doing is cleaning out the wound. And then the next year, we have the opportunity, like you've pointed out, to where people come back and go, my whole world has shifted because now I'm seeing it more clearly. Now I'm understanding better, where before I just had this limited or narrow worldview. I have come back with a wider view. And that's ultimately what I want, is see us for who we are. Do your best to, at the very least, listen to us. We would love understanding and empathy, and we will take what we can get, because as people begin to listen and learn and understand and empathize, they being the critical one again for me,
right,
that feeds into the growth, and that feeds into the healing.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think one of the things that sometimes when people get all, I don't want to say like crazy activists. I think I want to say like excited activists, like really passionate, like,
yes,
I guess another not so great way to put it would be born again activist. But, when people are in the middle of that, they really just like open up and realize things, and they're like, whoa, we got to fix this like right now. And I think part of what I think people forget when they're in that space, and what I try to remind people in my own way, but is that, not everybody's going to change.
Yeah.
You can't change people overnight. You have to, you got to meet them where they're at.
Absolutely.
And they're not going to change overnight. And there's some people you're just not going to reach.
Yes, absolutely. A concept that comes up in a public speaking class when I'm teaching persuasive speaking is that you will have an audience that is already on your side, and you will have an audience that is essentially undecided, and then you will have an audience that is firmly against your side, whatever it is. And the ones who are already on your side, you don't need to work too hard to persuade them of a thing. And the ones who are firmly against you, you can meet them closer to where they are. You can give them at least little pieces to say, I hear you. I understand where you're at. If you want to take a couple of steps in my direction, here's some alternatives. And it's the people in the middle who haven't figured it out yet, or who are in the midst of shifting opinion.
Right.
That persuasive speaking is really intended to reach. So what we're talking about here is the people who will never be comfortable with gender diverse pagans for whatever their reasons are. I'm not going to barge into their homes. I swear, I promise. and tell them that they're wrong. It's that's not the goal here.
Right.
The goal is to say, hi, we're here, and if you reach a point where you want to come talk to us, we'll be here to talk to. It's the ones who are willing to change their minds, who are exploring the changing their minds, that I will say this. I keep saying we, and it's not me and the mouse in my pocket. I absolutely cannot speak for all gender diverse pagans. I can only speak for me.
Right.
And what I want for myself is the opportunity for people to have the discussion with me, and, let's be reasonable. Let's be hospitable toward each other in the midst of the discussion. And, if we walk away going, we have two different points of view and never the twain shall meet, then at least we've engaged in the dialogue. But if I'm engaging with the dialogue and you're going, I never thought of that, or that makes sense, or some variant on that, then we can continue talking with each other. Then we can continue to establish not just the dialogue, but the relationship.
Right.
And again, I understand that a lot of this is idealistic, and I understand that a lot of this is, and we can make the world a better place, but, I believe we can make the world a better place, even if it's just one bit at a time. One of my favorite movies is called Cloud Atlas. It was out a few years ago.
Oh, yeah. I haven't had a chance to see that yet, actually. I will have to.
Okay. I am hesitant to use the quote because it's kind of a spoilery thing. But
we've had spoilers about Buffy, so, you might as well go ahead.
Okay. So there is a scene in which one of the characters confronts another character essentially about slavery, because in that particular time frame it's set in the 1800s. And the older character is basically saying, you're just one drop in the ocean. You can't make a change. You're just one person, essentially. And the person who has had their epiphany about what slavery actually is says, but what is an ocean but a multitude of drops? And that for me is like, maybe I am just a drop in the ocean.
Yeah.
But if I gather more drops, and if I point the way toward more drops, pretty soon we will be an ocean. And we're not going to wash you away. We're not going to drown you. Just, we're here. I am here very specifically because I recognize that I can fill a need that a lot of gender diverse pagans have for needing spaces that are hospitable to them. And I am very, very grateful for the work that the Circle of Caradwen does.
Thank you.
In promoting radical hospitality. And I want it to spread. And I am very, very much in favor of the more people we have doing the work, the more healing that can take place, and the more people can see, and the people who have been invisible can be seen in as safe a way as possible.
Absolutely.
Let's not forget that for some of the gender diverse people out there who have to have a job, who have to go to work, who have to do the things that they need to in order to survive, that they cannot risk being out in the world. But if at a pagan event we can make it comfortable for them to be themselves, then more power to doing that and giving them that space.
And that's basically the whole idea with radical inclusion, is that you are opening up the space for people to be exactly who they are, as they are at that moment. And the difficult thing is, and I think this is what some people miss, is it goes both ways, even for the people you don't like. And there is a boundary thing. Yes. There is such a thing as doing the protective boundaries, because yes. You got jerks on all sides. Because there are trans people that are like out and proud, and then are yelling at the people that have to be stealth or yes. have to or can't change yes. in certain spaces. And you've got a lot of that all over the place.
And no, there are edge factions, people who are taking it to radical or segregationist extremes, and you kind of look at them and go, yes, but we kind of still need to play nice with the other kids.
Right. And that's pretty much my point. I mean, there's the staying safe and making boundaries, which is necessary.
Absolutely.
However, even the people that don't agree with you, that are, they're being reasonable in the discussion. Let's say theoretically we're doing a discussion here, right?
Yes.
And even if they don't agree with you, there's a point of radical inclusion where you have to also accept them as they are, even if you don't like them.
It is not my place to change you.
Yes.
And the joke that pops to mind is, what did the Buddha say to the hot dog vendor? Make me one with everything. The follow-up joke, as many people seem to have heard, is the Buddha gives the hot dog vendor the money. The hot dog vendor does not give him any change back. The Buddha goes, but what about my change? And the vendor says, change comes from within.
Oh, that's horrible.
That is absolutely horrible. And yet, the point remains valid, is that I am not going to try and change you.
Right.
I will do my best to accept you, warts and all, because we all have them. None of us are perfect. Last time I checked, I have plenty of flaws. And I think for the people who disagree strongly with me, or the people who are like, no, rawr, or whatever it is, as long as we can reach a point where we can go, I can interact with you on a polite and or civil basis. We will probably have to agree to not talk about certain subjects because we're not going to ever agree.
Yeah.
But maybe I can hang out with you and we can sit and have coffee. And we can talk about other things. Maybe you just need somebody to listen to you make your statements and hold a space that is, well, we're human, we're going to judge, but as free from shaming judgment, I guess would be a way to put it, as possible.
Yeah.
And yes.
And that's where boundaries come in. Absolutely. Because, it could even be, well, we don't get along. We can't be together. And, as much as I'd like to do the coffee thing and listen to you, I don't think so I don't think I could do that without like smacking you around, Yeah. And it's like, okay, you're going to go play over there and we're going to go play over here.
Absolutely.
And as long as you just don't start doing stuff to me, we'll be okay. Yeah. Or legislating my life, or
yes, absolutely. And there's a heathen concept called frith. which is, at least in part, the concept is this space, whatever it is set as Frithstead. You come in, you put aside your weapons, you don't do harm to the other person in that space. And that goes for everybody in the space. It's not just, everybody but Bob. It's everybody puts aside their weapons because that's the design of the space. And as you pointed out, if you can't play well with my group, maybe we should not be entering Frith space with each other.
Mhm.
And if you cannot be treating me with respect, then boundaries, once again, it is utterly appropriate for me to say, my boundary is that I cannot deal with you because it drives me to a point of not wanting to engage in whatever fashion. But yeah, that I completely agree that hospitality, radical hospitality, does include the boundaries, both on your own behavior and the behavior of the people around you. And as long as everybody's willing to follow those boundaries, I think a lot of work can happen.
Absolutely. And like I said, also being inclusive if somebody who disagrees with you comes in, letting them exist, like, the spaces that I usually run are like that.
Yes.
I would be willing to have somebody who vehemently disagrees with me or my theologies
Okay.
come in and see what I'm about. As long as they're not, within, being polite and, respecting the space.
Okay.
And I need to respect that even if they don't agree with me, I will still welcome them in and still have that hospitality with them. I'm trying to meet them where they're at.
I agree. I really strongly endorse the idea of, if you come in and even if your ideas are at 180-degree opposite to mine, if you can still engage with me in a civil fashion, I'm willing to sit down with you and talk with you about it. But once you step over that boundary, that's when it is appropriate for me to say, I think we have reached a point where this is not working anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I would respectfully request that you leave. Because, and here's also part of this. Even if I am interacting respectfully with a person who believes that there are only two genders, period, end of story, and I am holding that space, I have to be conscious of the other people in my space, because if I am holding that space, if that space is my responsibility is not just to myself, it is to all of the people in the space.
Right.
And if one of the people in the space who needs the space to be safer than the rest of the world is having problems with that person, no matter how respectfully they're talking about it, maybe what I need to do is say, hey, can we table this and talk about it another time? Or, hey, can we step out into the hall? Or, hey, can we step out into the the big blue room with a shiny
yeah.
And do my best to take that person who is causing discomfort for people under my responsibility, and removing that person, not saying you have to leave now, but let's go somewhere else so that these people here who are maybe more vulnerable than I am have some level of safety okay. I have, and I vehemently disagree with this, but I have seen someone with a tattoo that says "Die cis scum."
I've seen that, yeah.
And unfortunately, while I understand the idea and I understand the rage, absolutely wholeheartedly, this is not a person I would invite into a room where cis people are likely to be. Because it is not going to end well for anybody. Mm-hmm. So this also really goes to how are you setting up your space? How are you defining hospitality?
Right. Are you clear about what's going on?
Exactly.
Are you explicit about what this is?
Absolutely.
You know, is it clear on the tin?
Yeah.
On the outside of the tin.
And again, I very much appreciate you telling me earlier before this about how the Circle of Caradwyn had explicit rules in their hospitality suite posted, so you could not say, I didn't know what the rules were.
Yeah.
So yeah, is it as listed on the tin? Is the tin clearly marked? Can you flip over the tin and look at the ingredient list?
Right.
And take the metaphor to absurd extremes. Yeah. Are the Danish butter cookies inside Danish butter cookies?
Right.
But yes.
And that goes into free will, because then that gives people the choice, okay, do I have the energy to interact in this space?
Absolutely.
Do I want to interact in this space? Do I need to go elsewhere?
Yes, absolutely. And if a space is designated as hospitable, enunciation, for gender diverse pagans, and the space is centering them and their experiences, then on the tin it should say, this space is designated as such. Please respect that the people inside may not identify with a gender binary. And that gives the people coming in the ability to choose whether they want to come into that space or not. And at the same time, if we're creating blended space, if we're creating space that is, got non-binary people and some trans people and some cisgendered people and a whole range of them, then it needs to, again, be clearly stated that if you are uncomfortable sharing space with fill-in-the-blank person or category of gender, you may wish to not attend this thing, whatever it is. And good guest laws.
Yeah, and basically being like, if you don't want to join, if you don't want to hear this discussion, if you don't feel comfortable being part of the discussion, that's okay.
Absolutely.
And being, and that's one of the things that I guess one of the points I'm trying to get across too is that it's okay. You don't have to.
Yes.
And that, we're going to be, bless you on your way,
Absolutely. And again, I'm not trying to ram anything down anybody's throat. That totally actually runs counter to how I run in the world. I'm not out to change your mind. I cannot change your mind. I can say, hi, let's talk. And if you want to listen, and if you are actually listening, then great, let's have the discussion. And if you stop listening to me after the first 5 words out of my mouth, I have no control over that. And then if your behavior devolves, I can go, that's where the line exists.
Yeah.
But I am not going to tell you that you have to think a certain way. I'm not going to tell you that you have to run your group a certain way. I'm not going to tell you that you are bad TM.
Yeah.
If you do not want trans people in your space.
Mm-hmm.
I will simply point out that you need to be clear, and you cannot just use terminology that is unclear in what you mean.
Mm-hmm.
You can't say it's a women-only space, as the example you gave earlier,
right,
and then not be accepting of people who identify themselves as women. For example, today, again, being fluid, I identify primarily as female.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not about to traipse off into Dianic space because no, I suspect the more inclusive, the more trans-inclusive Dianics would certainly be like, you're a woman, come with us.
Yeah.
We'll talk about these things. But I'm not going to put myself in that kind of a space because I can't guarantee they'll be okay with me. So that's also observing boundaries, but it's not just asking other people to observe my boundaries.
Yeah.
I have to do the same. I have to be willing to observe other people's boundaries.
And set your own and make sure and observe your own.
Oh, completely. This is all about where are my boundaries? Where are your boundaries? Are they interfering with each other? Do we need to step away?
Yeah.
And
well, also, there's also responsibility in part of the clergy or priest or people running the event as well. And I've talked about this with quite a few people on this podcast now.
Yes.
That, you have to be aware as the person running the thing or the priest or clergy, whatever. Okay. Am I clear about who's invited to this? Am I clear about who's welcome?
Yes.
And, am I thinking about all the contingencies?
Absolutely.
Like allergies and because that's why we do a lot of the stuff that we do. We don't have an alcohol-based Eucharist and we use gluten-free bread because there are people, including one of my deacons, that has allergies.
Oh, yeah.
So I think there's a certain amount of responsibility. And I think some groups forget that.
Very, very much so. And I know somebody who is deathly allergic to lavender. And so at any event that this person is invited to, I would, if I were running the event, I would make sure it was my responsibility to, there's no lavender here. Mm-hmm. So this brings up another interesting point, and I have no idea how much time we actually have left.
A couple more minutes, yeah.
Okay, so I will attempt to be brief about this.
Sure.
One of the other things that eventually I'd like to sit down and have some sort of workshop about is the responsibility of clergy for making radical hospitable space for gender diverse pagans. And then where's the responsibility in the congregation? So maybe a clergy member says, we're going to do this, but maybe the push comes from the congregation going, I have a friend I'd really like to invite, but I don't know if they will feel welcome here. So yes, as clergy, it is definitely our responsibility to define the space and be clear about the space. And if there's somebody in the congregation who comes to us and goes, I have this very dear friend who happens to be agender and I want to invite them to a thing, then we have to go, oh, wait, now let me add that to my, how do we make this go? And so I'm not ever saying that people should say no unless, that's the structure of the group. And again, please advertise it on the tin.
Oh, right.
But if you are going to open your doors, be ready for people to bring in stuff you were not anticipating and be ready to be responsible for, again, we come back to the consequences of your work, your words, your actions.
Yep, absolutely. And on that note, we're just about out of time.
Okay.
So if people would like to get in touch with you to talk about stuff, what's the best way to do that?
I do not have a blog yet. I am in the second to last quarter of my master's program. So I don't have a lot of brain space for doing blog stuff.
Yeah.
I will gladly provide an email for contact.
Sure. We can put that in the show notes.
Excellent. That's probably honestly the best way to meet me and discuss things. around this.
Okay.
I do have Facebook, but most of what I do on Facebook is support other people. Again, not a lot of time to do things. I think once I get my degree, theoretically anyway, I will have a lot more time, and I think that this will become, in all honesty, work that I will need to be doing as a blog as well. Mm-hmm. And I would like it if, once I get to that point, we can maybe append it to the notes.
Certainly.
I have something up and running. But yeah.
Yeah, certainly.
I will gladly provide an email for contact.
Yeah. Or maybe we just do another interview.
That would be.
Well, thank you for joining us today.
And thank you for having me here. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Okay.
I'd like to thank Dee for joining us this week. As always, if you have comments, questions, or would like to read the show notes, you can go to thisweekinheresy.com. You can support This Week in Heresy by subscribing to the show via iTunes or the Stitcher app, following us on Twitter at TWIH Podcast, or financially through Patreon. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.